So we asked, what does a man provide for a woman that she can't provide for herself? And my colleagues and I at Penn, one was a chemist, he thought it was in the kissing gases. I thought it was in the underarm sweat. We just had a difference of opinion. I always noticed that the general thing in dancing was a woman was shorter than a man. Where was her nose when they're hugging and kissing? That's just what I thought. And we knew it was going to be somewhere. There was going to be something coming from the other. Okay, so what we did was for this, the first set of, we wrote to the National Science Foundation and asked for money to test both. And they only gave us enough money to test one. So we had to battle it out and use logic, and I won. You know, maybe there would have been some in the kissing gases because we never tested it. But we definitely found in the underarm secretions of both men and women pheromones. So now I want to tell you what a hormone is and what a pheromone is, how they're alike and how they're different. A hormone is a substance that's produced in a gland. The ovary's a gland, the testes a gland. Can you name any other glands? Pituitary, good.
Pineal.
Pineal gland. Can you think of any others? Thyroid gland, great. Each of those glands produces hormones. That's what glands are about. They're hormone factories. It also happens that each of the glands generally produce two hormones that in terms of the regulation. When one is up, it inhibits the other, and they have opposing effects for the dance of the human body. So a hormone is a substance produced in a gland, gets into the bloodstream, circulates, gets off, and has action elsewhere from the place it was produced. That's why I say estrogen made in the ovary has actions in the brain, in the breast, and everywhere. And a pheromone is a substance that's an endocrine gland. Endo meaning inside, crying. The early anatomists saw what looked like tears when they looked at glands, and they saw tears. And they said, oh, let's call these endocrine. We don't know what they're doing, but we see these tears coming out of these glands. And those were the estrogen, progesterone. Those were the tiny substances that were the hormones. A pheromone is a substance produced in a gland that is external to the body, and it takes its action on another species-specific, conspecific. If it's a dog, it's other dogs. When a male dog urinates and marks his territory, he's dropping a pheromone all over the grass that tells other males to keep away. This is his territory. Humans, it turned out, in their underarms, we were able to collect the sweat from fertile. We only allowed fertile candidates to offer their sweat. We only allowed women who were sexually active and menstruating in the full of the moon, because there was something about the lunar cycles. So the donors of these substances wore underarm pads, came into a lab 3 times a week wearing no deodorant, only washing with ivory soap. They had stinky sweat pads. They gave it to a lab technician who dealt with it. And ultimately, these pads were put at the top of a tall column, filtered with alcohol through charcoal, which I was really happy about because I was worried about AIDS at the time. I didn't know where AIDS was being transmitted from, but I worried that it could be in the underarm sweat, and it was not, but we didn't know then. And what was happening then is we were collecting the underarm secretions of fertile women and attractive, sexually active young men, pooling them. For the women, it was a day 1, 2, 3 of their cycle pooled together, day 4, 5, 6 of their cycle pooled together, and they were then frozen for a year, in special jars, taken out a year later, thawed out, and applied to naive young women to see whether, versus placebo, the pheromone could be rubbed above their upper lip 3 times a week to get the effects that we already knew existed, and we were 2 different effects. For women who came into the study naive to test a pheromone versus a placebo, who said they had a 29.5-day cycle, they were sent to test female essence to look for menstrual synchrony. The donor's day 1 sample, and then her day 3, 3 days later, and then her day 5, 3 days later, over the course of 14 weeks, did the recipient's normal 29-day cycle synchronize with the thawed essence from a year before? And the answer was yes, it did. And the other question was, how about the male essence? Women who came into the study, they were willing to test a pheromone, and they said they had irregular cycles. They were not 29-day cyclers. They were going to test the male essence to see whether male essence would cause them to become 29-day cyclers. This first graph shows those subjects who tested the male essence, who were initially irregular, long or short cyclers, versus placebo. And what we found was that the pheromone did, the stimulus, which was the pheromone, we didn't know yet that we could call it a pheromone, so we called it a stimulus. The stimulus applied of the male essence 3 times a week to those separate people caused their cycles to become closer and closer to a 29-day cycle, whereas the placebo users had no change, and their cycle length was not within the fertile range that you see that the stimulus recipients were. That was the first study, and this figure shows the last cycle of all the subjects. So these women had 3 cycles over 14 weeks. This shows the last one. Let's look at the next slide. This one shows if we took out the women who were weekly active sexually during this experiment and said, well, what about just the women who didn't have any sex on a regular basis? The effect got stronger. So we got the noise out of the system, because some of the women entered the study with irregular cycles, but they got a boyfriend, and they started having sex, and the sex may have accounted for the being in the fertile range. And when we got only non-weekly subjects showing, non-weekly active, what we found was the stimulus recipients were much more inclined to be 29-day cyclers than the placebo users. Okay, the next, let's see if there's another, let's see how that works. Treatment of all subjects, and this is the probability levels of the tests of significance of what I just told you about, showing that male essence caused irregular cyclers to become fertile type cyclers. That's what that slide shows.